Now, as the name of the video implies, this is part 11 of a story, so if you haven't seen the first several parts yet, or have missed some along the way, I'd highly recommend starting at part 1, or picking up where you left off, or this part is going to be very confusing to you. I'll include a link to all previous parts in the description below. And now, without any further ado, let's get back to the story. We find ourselves focused in on the burnt and scarred face of Obi-Wan Kenobi. But that face, which seems to be devoid of any emotion as we slowly begin to pull back from it, has aged perhaps 8 to 10 years, and as we continue to pull back, we see that he is wearing a full suit of black, red, and gold Mandalorian armor, and that all around him, wearing armor of various colors, are more Mandalorians, all preparing for battle, and apparently huddled in some type of dropship. And as we pull back even further, we now find ourselves focused in on two Mandalorians with their helmets off. One is a grizzled, bearded old veteran, while the other is young and wide-eyed, and those eyes are currently locked on Obi-Wan Kenobi. Where'd he get a suit of our armor? The youngster suddenly wonders aloud. It takes the veteran a moment to realize he's talking about Obi-Wan, and then says, the leaders of each of the most honored houses all donated a piece of their armor to create that suit. All the houses except Vizsla, that is. The suit was then painted by someone in Clan Ren, I believe. The youngster frowns and then says, why'd they do that? Because he was married to the Duchess at one point? That doesn't earn him a suit of our armor. The veteran chuckles. Kid, you must be new to the unit, and have been living on a deserted moon for a while now. The youngster frowns, but then nods and says that he was just assigned to this unit. And that's when the veteran says, well, I'm not new. Been here since the start, fighting at the general's side now for over 8 years. And he's earned the right to wear that armor, more so than you, kid, who only gets to wear it because you were born into the right family, which is probably the same reason you got this assignment. The youngster frowns angrily now, and with his eyes still on Kenobi says, and why do you call him the general? He's not even an official part of our army. I thought he was just supposed to be like some type of ambassador from the Republic, and that he's only here to help us hunt down and destroy the last of the Jedi, not lead our army. The veteran chuckles and answers, we call him the general because he likes to be called the general. Says it feels right to him for some reason, like he was meant to be called that. And we call him the general because, again, it's something he's earned. The youngster scoffs. Earned it? Didn't he betray the jet? But the veteran cuts him off with a look, and then says very quietly, careful, kid. The general doesn't like anyone talking about his time with the Jedi, or anyone saying he betrayed them. They were the ones who betrayed him, and the Republic they were supposed to serve. The youngster gives a cocky grin, and then says rather loudly, oh, well, I've heard rumors that your precious general is actually a Sith named Darth. But again, the grizzled old veteran cuts him off with a look before he says, he doesn't much care for that name, and the last fool to call him that, well, he turned his body inside out. The young Mandalorian scoffs and rolls his eyes, but his humored look quickly fades when he realizes the old veteran was apparently being very literal. We then hear an announcement that they are entering the atmosphere and approaching the landing zone, and that's when the ship starts to be rocked by turbulence, and we hear explosions outside, indicating they are being fired upon as they approach. That's when the grizzled veteran puts his helmet on and says to the youngster, who suddenly looks a little nervous, don't worry, kid. Likely won't be any Jedi here on Felucia. Just battle droids. The youngster frowns as if disappointed, yet at the same time also looks slightly relieved. He then asks as he puts his own helmet on, why did these separatists leave the Republic to join with the disgraced Jedi anyway? The veteran shrugs. Some systems just didn't buy into the overwhelming evidence that the Jedi were building their own army and going to betray the Republic. The youngster shakes his head and says, but that doesn't make any sense. Why would the Republic ever purposely make the Jedi enemies? What would that ever accomplish? We hear the grizzled old veteran chuckle now as he says, I don't know, kid. Well, you'd have to ask the separatists why they believed the lies of the Jedi. The youngster then asks, and what do you believe? The veteran shrugs as if it just doesn't matter to him and says, where the general goes, I follow. It's that simple for me. The youngster then shakes his head slightly, but he's not even a Mandalorian. We hear the veteran chuckle. When the battle's over, kid, and if you live through it, tell me how Mandalorian you think the general is, and if you feel any differently about following him into the next battle. The youngster then quickly says, the only Mandalorian I truly follow is Pre Vizsla. Funny, the grizzled veteran then says back, I don't see Pre Vizsla here with us, just the general. A moment later, the turbulence stops, and we hear a loud thud as the ship lands on the planet. That's when we focus back in on the face of Kenobi, which still holds absolutely no emotion, as he slips on the mask of Darth Revan. We're then taken just outside the dropship, and see that there are maybe a dozen more just like it, all of which have landed amongst the exotic and colorful foliage of the planet Felucia, and watch as the door to the ship we were just on opens, and the first one off is the General, and he immediately begins to stride forward into the thick foliage all around him, as the Mandalorians disembark and begin to fan out behind him. We then switch scenes, and are focused in on the face of Anakin Skywalker, and that face has of course aged perhaps some 9 years since the last time we saw it, and as we pull back, we see he is still on the island of the First Jedi Temple, and that he stands on a rocky outcropping at dusk, looking out at an endless ocean. A few moments later, Dooku quietly comes up from behind him, and before he can say anything, it is Anakin who says, "Something is coming. I feel it. We're all in great danger here." Dooku moves forward then, and stands beside Anakin in silence for a long moment, also looking out at the ocean. He then says, "Until we came here, I never knew I could find such peace within myself, or that I could feel so close to the Force." His head then lowers a bit as he finishes, "But, like you, I also feel something is coming, and we must be ready for it." Anakin then says, "Perhaps it's time to leave the island, to do some good in the galaxy once more." But Dooku shakes his head. "No, Anakin. What's left of the old order is still being hunted by the Mandalorians. If we leave the island now, we just become targets for them as well. We must have patience and wait for the right moment. And until then, we must continue to make ourselves ready here for whatever may be coming. Which is why I wanted to talk to you in the first place." Anakin frowns and replies, "Now is not the time for me to take on a Padawan, Master." Dooku gives a bit of a grin and says back, "I also wasn't eager to take on a Padawan once upon a time, but the younglings are not younglings anymore. Most would have been taken on as a Padawan years ago." Anakin frowns and says, "And do you plan on choosing a new Padawan? And what of Master Yaddle?" Dooku puts a hand on Anakin's shoulder and says, "You, Anakin, were my last and greatest Padawan. And I do not say that lightly, considering Qui-Gon became more powerful than I could have possibly imagined." Dooku smiles, and both he and Anakin get a good laugh out of that for a moment before Dooku continues. "You are the future of the Jedi Order, Anakin, not me, and not Yaddle, who spends most of her time searching in vain for new younglings across the galaxy. And the Padawan you choose will also play a big part in shaping the future of the Order. So choose wisely, but most importantly, do choose Anakin." After a brief moment, Anakin nods to that and says, "Speaking of Qui-Gon, it's been some time, years even, since he last came to us. What do you think that means?" Dooku replies, "Likely that he has business elsewhere." Anakin grins to that and says back, "Well, yes, but what do you imagine that business is?" Dooku gives a slight shrug. "Training Master Yoda would be my guess." Anakin frowns. "And why isn't Master Yoda here with us? And why isn't Qui-Gon also teaching you?" Dooku replies, "I cannot say, but it is not our place to question the will of the Force. If Yoda is meant to be elsewhere, then so be it. And if I am not meant to retain my consciousness after death, then that is something I accept." Dooku then shuts his eyes and tilts his head back as a strong breeze blows off the ocean. He then says, "Just as long as it means that when I become one with the Force, some part of me will get to linger in this place forever." We then switch scenes and are focused in on the troubled face of Padme Amidala, and as we slowly pull back, we see that she sits alone in her apartment on Coruscant, and that's when we hear a noise, the sound of a door sliding open perhaps, and Padme immediately springs to her feet and goes running right into the arms of Obi-Wan Kenobi, who has just entered her apartment, though Obi-Wan no longer wears his ornate Mandalorian armor, but rather some simple dark clothing. "I still get worried every time I hear you've gone into battle," Padme says to him. Obi-Wan pulls away from her just enough to give her a reassuring smile. "There wasn't much of anything to worry about on Felucia, only some battle droids, not a single Jedi to be found there, unfortunately." Padme then says, "What about the rumors Anakin was spotted there?" Obi-Wan is silent for a long moment before saying, "Where did you get intel like that?" "I still have some friends left in the Senate, you know," Padme reminds. Kenobi is again quiet for a long moment before saying, "No, yet again no trace of Anakin or Yoda or Dooku or even Qui-Gon, which again leads me to wonder if they're all hiding somewhere and letting the rest of the Jedi fight this war alone, or if maybe they're just all dead." "You really think Anakin could be dead?" Padme says back quickly, and then seems to immediately regret her words. That's when Obi-Wan takes a long, deep breath as he lets go of Padme and walks a few steps away from her before saying, "Why always so much concern for him? You met him once, when you two were children." Padme then immediately responds, "And if he hadn't won that pod race, we might still be stuck on Tatooine right now." Obi-Wan rolls his eyes to that, and Padme continues, "And you forget, I saw him again. That day." Obi-Wan snorts, "That day? You mean the day 3 Jedi barged into your apartment and held you hostage until you were rescued by Mandalorians?" Padme lowers her gaze and shakes her head a bit. "We both know that's not what happened that day." Obi-Wan sighs. "Well, it is what you testified before the Senate happened, which helped cement Palpatine's case against the Jedi Order once and for all, which then led to the Separatists leaving to fight with the Jedi, and hence this whole war." Padme shuts her eyes tight, as if the memory is too painful to deal with, and says with a lowered head, "I only finally did that so we could be together, so that Palpatine would let me go. I did it for you, for us, Obi-Wan." It's now Obi-Wan's turn to shut his eyes, as if fighting something painful, and when he opens them again, he seems calmer somehow. "I know, I'm sorry. This war with the Jedi and the Separatists, it's taking its toll on me. Somehow, they've held on for nearly 9 years now, and many Jedi are still missing, assuming we never just found their bodies amongst the ruins of the temple." Padme, her eyes still shut and her head still lowered, then says, "Something else is taking its toll on you too, isn't it? I might not know how to feel the Force, but I can feel the change in you, that as these years go by, I'm losing you to something else, and it's not the memory of Satine I fight against anymore. It's something dark." Obi-Wan then turns from her and walks to a nearby window and stares out at the bustling city beyond. That's when Padme asks, "Why are you still fighting this war, Obi-Wan? Why do you so mercilessly and relentlessly hunt the Jedi, in order to which you once belonged and, in your heart, you know never betrayed the Republic? Is this all really to eventually save Mandalore from that monster Pre-Vizsla and bring peace to it, as Satine dreamed? Or is it something else now? Something else entirely?" There is a long silence, and finally Padme pleads, "Talk to me, Obi-Wan. We've been together now for almost 9 years, and I feel like I understand you less and less every day." After another long moment, Obi-Wan turns from the window and faces Padme once more. He looks as if he's about to say one thing, but then stops himself and says another. "The Separatist forces are dwindling, the Jedi leadership is nearly extinct, and Vizsla's grip over the clans is weakening. Soon I will end this war, challenge and defeat Vizsla for the rule of Mandalore, and bring a lasting peace to the galaxy." Obi-Wan smiles, walks towards Padme and wraps her in his arms, and says, "Soon, my love, there will be no more war to fight, or Jedi to hunt. It will be us, and when it is, we can finally start a family." We then focus back in on the face of Padme, and see great concern there as we watch one of her hands move to her stomach. We then switch scenes and focus in on the face of Darth Plagueis, which, even though only some 9 years have passed, looks as if it has aged much more than that. In fact, he looks like he has become little more than a haggard old man, and as we pull back from him, we see that he is laying on his back in the Sith shrine far below the ruins of the Jedi Temple on Coruscant, surrounded by the statues of ancient Sith warriors. That's when we, and Plagueis, hear footsteps echoing throughout the chamber, and we watch as the tall, lanky Plagueis scurries to his feet, and in the dim light offered by a few torches on the wall, we see a figure wearing black, red, and gold Mandalorian armor approach him, and also wearing the mask of Darth Revan. Plagueis then says as the figure stops a few paces away from him, "You, of course it would be you that would come to finish me off." The figure in the Revan mask then clasps his hands behind his back and begins to pace around Plagueis, and around the inside of the circle of Sith statues. "In my time," the figure says, "there was no such thing as a rule of 2. Plagueis then lets loose a cackling laugh before saying, "In your time, Kenobi, do not try and lecture me about the history of the Sith." The figure in the Revan mask then stops its pacing and slowly tilts his head up to look at Plagueis. The amused face on the look of Plagueis then vanishes as he says, "Unless you are not Kenobi, but that is impossible. I was the one who had the mask given to Satine in the first place. There was nothing more affixed to it than a remnant of Revan, and that remnant would do little more than help corrupt the young Kenobi and bring him to the dark side." The figure in the Revan mask begins to pace again. "For a long time I watched you chase immortality, Darth Plagueis, the Wise. But you went about it all wrong. To conquer death, you must become part of it, a part of the cosmic force itself. Plagueis shakes his head. What you suggest is impossible. We hear Revan chuckle slightly. And yet, here I am. Plagueis then says as he watches Revan continue to pace around him, that body, it is still Kenobi's. Revan nods. For now, I still have use of Kenobi, and when that use ends, so shall he. Plagueis then says, the growing power of the dark side, it's been you all along. Again, Revan nods. Using the dark side is a corruption of the Force itself, one that leaves a small yet permanent mark upon it. For thousands of years now, I have been drawing that power to me from within the cosmic force itself, preparing to make my return. Plagueis then asks, and what is it one so powerful wants from me? Revan responds, as I said, I come from a time before the rule of two, and have no use for it. Instead, I will create a new Sith Empire, and you will be one of my first subjects. Plagueis' face darkens. I will bow to no one. Revan nods. Then you will simply be destroyed. The choice is yours. Plagueis simply stands there quietly, and then Revan says, as I expected. But fear not, Plagueis. You will not be my only new subject. We then switch scenes and are focused in on the face of Palpatine, and as we pull back, we see that he sits at his desk in his office late at night, apparently doing some work on a datapad. That's when suddenly his eyes go wide, and he jumps to his feet and frees and ignites a saber from the inside of his robe. A moment later, the door to his office slides open, and in walks Darth Plagueis, who simply says, my old apprentice, we have much to discuss. And that is where this part ends. Well, that's all I've got for you this time. Now it's your turn to tell me what you thought of this part of the story and what might happen next. So leave your comment below and let's talk some Star Wars. And until next time, thanks for watching.